Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Live with Littledata. I'm Edward, and I'm joined today by Jordan from Yofi. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
So you've got a super interesting product, which is about helping retailers reduce fraud and shrinkage, as it's euphemistically called, theft in other people's language.
Yeah,
And I'd love to sort of talk specifically today about how that sort of helps for brands that are marketing through Klaviyo and how we can sort of help reduce the amount of fake and fraudulent accounts that we're marketing to, or we think we're marketing to.
yeah,
But tell me a little bit of overview of your products and how you got into this business.
yeah. It's kind of funny. You're like, how are you jumping from fraud to accounts, right? But I promise there's a connection, right? So
Yeah.
me and my co-founders, we worked in big retailers for like Nike, Gucci, Adidas, and what we ended up seeing, especially during the pandemic, what we ended up seeing is kind of a rise of what we call abuse. So people taking advantage of these customer-friendly policies like free returns, first-time buying coupons, warranties that are designed to attract and retain customers, but are unfortunately create arbitrage and opportunities for people to commit fraud. So massive impact to the profitability. But what we ended up seeing is it skewed all the data downstream, right? Because people were using multiple different accounts to be able to say, hey, I'm a new first time buyer, or hey, my birthday's in May. Let me get my 20% off birthday coupon, right? And so what we ended up seeing is that people actually started using, especially a lot of these online channels, because a lot of retailers and brands still think new email, new phone number equals new customer, right? And in a lot of times we ended up seeing that not being correct. So candidly, at these big retailers, we all made tens of thousands or tens of millions of dollars of wrong decisions because we were using bad data that impacted how do we forecast our inventory? How's our marketing metrics doing? How many legitimate customers? So yeah, a lot of really expensive mistakes we made to help us kind of come forward and form the company.
And as you say, brilliantly, you can bring some of that tech to smaller businesses that are also trying to protect against the same issues, and for whom it's still a very sizable chunk, potentially, of their profits. So let's talk a bit about kind of how and why would a fake profile get onto Klaviyo? I mean, why would you not have genuine customer data in there?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are tied to incentives, right? So there's two ways to basically create a profile. One is just going into the email list, right? Like, hey, I'm going to just sign up for a new sign up for an email. I'll be able to do it. And I think a lot of those emails actually have some sort of incentive, whether it's VIP program or loyalty points or coupons, right? So there's
Mm.
incentive to sign up because we love retailers, but I don't know if I like people want to give their email away for a legitimate reason, not just for the sake of it. Or
Yeah.
the other one is typically related to a purchase, right? I'm sure you know more, probably better than anyone, but like, hey, if I'm going to try to purchase something or I'm adding to an abandoned cart, right? Like, how do I have that touch point as a consumer perspective? That flows into Klaviyo, and it happens a ton for our consumers.
So let's talk about the so you say two basic scenarios. One is kind of fraudulently trying to get an email list. Is a not. I mean, obviously great that they're trying to get an email list. You probably wouldn't turn down. That's not really fraud. But what they're actually doing is fraudulently trying to claim an incentive that you're giving out in order to get on the email list. And how would people do that, and how would you protect against it?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways we think about it, right? We're more focused on what we call like data integrity, right? So
Mm.
look, I think we've all done it, right? We've all used the different email to get 10-15% off a brand we've purchased from before, right? Like I think it's just common practice. And to be honest, it's not the end of the world. The retailer doesn't care that much about it. They care
Mm.
when people are doing it cyclically, right? So if I do it 10, 20, 30 times, that becomes an issue. And
Mm.
a lot of these folks are looking for arbitrage opportunities. So it's like, hey, can I get 20% off here? Let's say it's, $10, I buy it for 8. Can I go relist it on Amazon or eBay? Whatever I can't
Mm.
sell in that 30-day window, I return back, right? Really expensive kind of cycle. But I think even with like you take the good legitimate actors of using multiple emails, what it does is it all goes downstream. So how much does it impact? How many profiles do I have in Klaviyo? How many of them are legitimate? How many of them are, fake and duplicate? Because Klaviyo for a lot of brands is actually like the CRM system for a lot of times where it's like,
Right.
hey, this is what I'm using to forecast my marketing metrics. what campaigns are working successful, how much I'm putting into promotion, what inventory should I forecast. And so what we see a lot is from the notion of data fidelity of like, how can I trust the data that I'm using? And then also, how can I build correct actions based off legitimate consumers? And we think about this also where with the growth of personalization or the growth of generative AI, right? If you're not using good, legitimate, clean data, it's going to skew your data downstream, right? Kind of garbage in equals garbage out. So very much focused on the notion of like, how do you understand the intentionality and the legitimacy of your customers within Klaviyo?
Yeah. So just to break that down a bit, so you've got maybe somebody spotted that they get 20% off the first purchase, but they can resell your product for to 10% off somewhere else. So that what they do is they create Edward Upton +1, Edward Upton +2, Edward Upton plus up to 20 at gmail.com, and they go and purchase this 20% off voucher 20 times, 30 times. What can you do to protect against that as a brand?
Yeah, so I mean, you can use Yofi. No, but like what we do is, I mean, I think generally, right? Like, I think it's easy to identify like Jordan 1, Jordan 2, Jordan 3, right? Because it's an obvious pattern. But a lot of these folks are professionals, right? Like, there are thousands of communities where people are making millions of dollars a month reselling or committing return abuse, right? So it's very much done in like Discord, Telegram, Facebook Marketplace, etc., right? So what they're doing is they're constantly finding ways of arbitrage or spoofing, right? So like you'll go from Jordan and Zach and Edward are all the same person, even though it has different names, right? Different, IP addresses, right? And so what we're able to do is we create what we call like directly within Klaviyo called a risk score, right? So what we can do is we can say, okay, this is clearly a bot that's coming up. Let's just like prevent the pop-up, right? Within Klaviyo saying, hey, go sign up for 10%, or here's 10%. Or even if someone places an order, right? Because it's not necessarily a bad thing that a bot or a reseller places an order, but we create that risk score that goes directly into Klaviyo where you can say, okay, well, let me go suppress this, right? And we break the risk scores into just high risk, but also reseller risk. And the reason we just delineate reseller risk is because there's a love-hate relationship where like sometimes you hate resellers, but if you have old inventory sitting on the shelves, they're the first person you should call, make it final sale so they can return. But also, how do you play against the duality of those?
Okay, so a certain group of people who are not, they could be bad actors, but actually, you actually might want to encourage them for certain kinds of products and certain types of campaign. Yeah. So we'll come on to a bit more like this difference between good and bad actors because it's not an easy line. But let's just go back to the second scenario. So you can sort of suppress just capturing emails or giving away the discount voucher by having risk score. And sorry, as you go a bit deeper, because we were talking earlier about how you determine that risk score. So tell us a little bit about how might you judge that a person on the website is even before they see the email, even before they enter the email, is a high risk person.
Yeah, so we have a lot of really advanced telemetry data. So you think about like gyroscopic, accelerometer, how's the mouse being dragged. So what we basically have done is we create like what we call like a digital body language. And through understanding the digital body language of an individual, we're also mapping based off previous risk scores of how someone was doing this, right? Like based off this like session ID of how Jordan has entered the site, how am I interacting? Does that correlate with low, medium, or high score? So within that like 1-2 second, what we're able to do is actually send a trigger to say, hey, this is a bot, or this is, someone that's high risk. Don't actually send them, the coupon or, the promotion offer. We can actually just tell Klaviyo, hey, you know what, based off this high risk, don't actually have this dynamic offer come up.
Cool. So it's basically a score that, doesn't actually need to enter an email even before that, even just how they browse on the site, how they move the mouse. It's kind of enough to tell you whether they're a bot or not. And let's get back to the second scenario. So that's kind of like more when they're actually, you've got someone who's trying to go through the checkouts and enter the email there, and they go to the Klaviyo list. Again, why would people do that? And why would a bot do that? I should say.
Yeah. I think there's a good distinction, like who's bot versus human, right? Like what's sentient. But like, why would a bot do it? I mean, I think some really common use cases are just card testing and testing, just testing as a landscape, where it's like a lot of people will go on to random sites, and especially if you think about like Shopify, like it's a whole universal backbone standard set of APIs where it's like I can test on any store, right? And then eventually use it for maybe like targeting a specific store. So one is just saying, how's my bot working? How's it interacting? Am I able to go through the site? Am I able to bypass like the firewall security? based tools, right? So that's one. So you might get like a flurry of abandoned carts or a flurry of email sends. It's typically a test. Testing for what, right? One of the big ones is card testing. So basically, if I have a whole bunch of stolen cards, can I actually test the bin and understand which credit card is legitimate, right? So we see this with our customers all the time, where it's like they're getting about 50,000 attempted checkouts, like, in a day or two, where it's basically someone trying to buy a pair of socks over and over again, trying to basically just test different notions of like, is this credit card working? And some of them are not that advanced where they're using the same email, so it's relatively simple. But some of them are more advanced where they're using hundreds, if not thousands, of different emails to kind of hide intentions and look more human, look more normal from an abandoned cart checkout perspective.
So in Klaviyo, they're going to show up as these hundreds of profiles, which seem to have high intent. You probably would try and retarget, but they're actually never going to buy because they say they don't actually have a valid payment method and probably didn't want to buy a product anyway. They just wanted to test whether they could buy a product using that card.
Yeah, we work with a large retailer, and last year we suppressed 13 million fake accounts. So it might sound crazy, but like these people come in volume, and it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when, right? When someone finds an opportunity or someone sees that they can do card testing or actually do some sort of testing on your site, because like they're testing the cards, but also one of the things they're doing is also testing legitimacy of emails, right? So you think about the whole checkout process, name, email, address, right? They're trying to see what gets flagged as fraud or declined as fraud. Right. So what they do is they take these good legitimate accounts. Once they find what's a good account, they typically take it to go commit fraud elsewhere or even on your store. Right. So it really depends on the individual and kind of the products that you're selling as well.
Okay, so let me be a cynical store owner. Great, I've got these fake profiles on. That happens to everyone. Why should I care? What does it matter to me if I've got thousands of people? I mean, they didn't buy from me, so what damage is it doing?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we love our friends at Klaviyo, but it does increase your bill pretty substantially, where now I think Klaviyo is very, very militant on the number of active profiles you have and then the number of emails you sent, right, for pricing threshold. But so, I mean, that's obviously the direct ROI.
Well, it's a new change that. So they didn't used to price per profile, they just price per email send. But I think what they realized is there's some smart brands out there that are basically using Klaviyo to build the audiences and then exporting it somewhere else. So they need to start charging people for the actual number of profiles they have. So even if you don't think that you're being charged the profiles, you soon will be. And so actually having loads of basically unmarketable profiles is costing you.
Yeah, it's costing you, but I think like for us, like the bigger one is more indirect, where it's like, how's it impacting your marketing metrics, right? Like how are your, open rates, click rates, conversion? How are they truly doing? What are successful marketing campaigns? And then you also think about Klaviyo a lot of time is the CRM for a lot of these brands. So how's that impact my inventory forecasting, my data-driven decisions, right? Because most brands are moving into this data-driven world of, hey, let's be objective, use the data to forecast, right? Well, how are you going to use it if your data is skewed by 20, 30, 40%, right? Where we see across the board between like, Shopify brands, large enterprises, like upwards of like 30% of profiles are fake duplicate accounts, which is a pretty big chunk of change when you think about like from a cost perspective, but also how are my marketing teams doing, right? Like how am I using potentially skewed data downstream to make some pretty expensive decisions?
So just, I guess you can bring that back to sort of real account. Like you say, if like a third of your profiles are fake, then if you actually excluded those, the other 2/3 that are real, you'd suddenly look a lot better. Your conversion metrics and your open rates and stuff will suddenly go up by 50%, because obviously by definition these people are these profiles are effectively dead. No one's going to come back and go and read those accounts. I think it's kind of perhaps a good point to segue into Littledata's Klaviyo integration, because obviously we're all about helping brands retarget abandoned carts, but we want to be able to win back real customers who are actually going to purchase. So I think that's why the two tools fit nicely together, because yes, Littledata can enhance the audience that you can send those emails to. But what you want to do is send as many emails to real people and as few as possible to bots, because as I said, you could retarget bots as long as you like, but they're never going to come back and buy, or not because of your emails anyway. So I think I think that's really interesting, and I also just think it's really interesting that I mean, again, just to reiterate a point you made earlier about AI. I mean, I've just been at Klaviyo's conference this week, and they were talking a lot about all of the different ways they're building AI into the products. Obviously, I've always had this thing which is garbage in, garbage out. So if your Klaviyo account is stuffed with garbage profiles, then the AI is not going to do a very good job of recommending who to target or which segments to use.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. I think that's like the biggest thing that's being slept on with this whole notion of generative AI and everyone pushing to it, because it's probably the least sexy and the least fun thing to do is like data integrity and making sure that your data is clean. But like, look, if you have a whole bunch of people that apparently are buying socks, right? But that's because it was bought or something automated. Is that truly indicative of your legitimate consumers? And I can tell you, like, you can go into some horror stories of making some really, really expensive decisions where, like, we had, like, for example, like, we had like a botnet or a bunch of fake profiles, like, searching a specific thing at a big retailer I used to work for, right? And so what we ended up doing is saying, well, this is the most popular, product that's selling. Like, we have to make this the number one most trending brand. But when we ended up, like, once we started decoupling it, it was actually just an automated script looking over and over again. So we put a ton of inventory forecasting behind it. We put a ton of marketing around this like product that no one actually wanted, right? So it becomes really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen this on some of our Shopify brands that get bots that seem to be adding to carts specifically to test inventory. And so again, they'll go into Google Analytics and they'll see that the numbers of of ads to cart, and they're like, this product is insanely popular. Or it seems, there must be a terrible problem. Like, you've got 1 million people adding to cart and hardly anyone's purchased it. And it easily wastes a lot of organizational time running around. When in actual fact the answer was no one was trying to buy it. It was someone was just trying to test how much inventory you had left. And I've written about this before, but the basic hack there, which I think you can actually stop by setting some sort of checkout verification rules in Shopify. But basically, by default, Shopify throws an error message back if you try and add 1 million items to cart, saying, sorry, we've only, the maximum number is 252, which basically gives you an idea of how much inventory of that product is available. So I think that's becoming a common strategy for just competitor. I guess that's another use of bots, right? In this use case, is basically competitor tracking. People are just trying to check what you as a competitor are actually selling or having inventory.
Yeah. And like, I mean, and to be honest, that's like a big part of what we do. So we're talking obviously a lot about Klaviyo, but what we call is like, we've created a concept that we call universal filter, right? So we also embed into, Klaviyo, Google Analytics, like different tools to be able to segment out what's the legitimacy of the traffic versus not, right? So instead of you guessing, we actually go into, like, for example, like one of the things we do is we take our risk scores and we can embed them into like a customer support tool or return platform, right? So based off the intentionality or the risk of the customer, you can segment and make these dynamic policies across the board. So whether it's return platforms, whether it's CS handling, or even Google Analytics. So
you're going to say, let's ignore these CS requests from a bot, someone who's a high risk bot instead.
Yeah, or just like also knowing that this is a bad individual. So knowing that like they're just going to constantly pest you or bully you to you get what they want, right? So also being able to say, well, hey, this person's done it 10 times, right? Like this is the intention, even though they're using different accounts to do it, right? Big with returns, right? Like what we're helping a lot of brands do is actually segment and make custom return policies where it's being able to say, well, hey, you know what? We're going to charge you a $10 fee, 10% fee, right? Hey, we're just not going to accept your return, right? Ultimately for the brand to choose, but like, how do we allow them to make that dynamic policy to kind of isolate that 1-2% of total customers, which we view as abusers, and also, by the way, contribute to about 20% of returns? How do we add a little bit more friction to them so your good, legitimate consumers can get the free returns and all the benefits that they require, but also are used to? So
let's talk a little bit about Google Analytics, because I think there is a suspicion that although Google Analytics is trying to measure the actual, people actually browsing the websites. Again, a lot of suspicion that a lot of so-called visitors are actually bots, and that there is a filter in Google Analytics by default, sort of filter out known bots and crawlers. But I feel like that's only a real basic level. I don't know what your view is on that, and how much of the traffic in Google Analytics is sort of non-human, and what can you do about it, if anything?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think just taking it objectively, I think what it says is, I think what 50, 60% of search data, like, searches on Google are bots or automated scripts, right, already.
Yeah.
And the way to think about it is like there's a variety of different types of bots, right? So whether it's crawlers, whether it's checkout bots, whether it's like, more like a DDoS, like I'm going to send like a million bots at once trying to take down your
Yeah.
site. So what we were able to see is that it's quite easy to start bypassing by focusing on like a nuanced use case, right? So like you think about sneakers or exclusive products, right? They're all able to bypass like the checkout or the firewall layer because it's very much like preventing of DDoS. And so what we see is like a fair notion, right? Because using the notion of like a whitelist or a block list is actually quite dangerous, where it's like constantly new accounts are being created. So if they're not identified, they're not being able to discern, right? Like there's some obvious things where you can see a massive spike in traffic and you're like, okay, well, clearly bots, but how do we show it day to day and persistent?
They're actually not known bots. They're effectively just someone deliberately trying to avoid detection and creating effectively a new profile.
Exactly.
And so getting back to the question, I mean, is that something your product helps do, or are there ways that users might reduce that sort of, let's say roughly it's 50% of the traffic?
Yeah, our users are definitely able to use it. I mean, we embed into native tools, right? So whether it's Google Analytics, Klaviyo, etc., right? Like our notion is just to provide a really clean data set for the end user
Right.
within their application. So what we're able to do is like what we've helped our clients do is like identify and reduce the impact of like what we call bad actors by like 50, 60%. So being able to, and in Google Analytics, there's not really a bad actor. It's just like, how do you segment who's on your site? And we have a pretty high level of detection around like 87%, where we're able to actually detect, okay, this is a bot on your site, just go filter it out with an easy filter.
So it's a similar thing. You basically pass on the risk score and then you can filter out based on risk score.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what's your view of, so I know one of our competitors is trying to do that using Cloudflare's has a sort of bot detection API. I don't know whether you've seen that or it works, I think, in a different way to your software, but what would be the sort of differences there?
Yeah. So I mean, this can get really like technical, but I'll keep it more high level, where it's like what we look at is Cloudflare is amazing, by the way, one of my favorite companies. But what they do is they very much look at network-based bots, right? So it's a little bit different, where you think about like a scraper or a crawler, or if you think about sneakers or Taylor Swift or any of these like high release things, how are bots getting through? They're able to get through because they're able to get through, and most bot detection is at the firewall WAF layer, right? And so they're able to get around the proof of work quite easily by being able to say, hey, I'm going to buy a product. And so what we think is like the only way to really discern a bot is actually looking beyond just the network or firewall layer of how something is coming in. It's also how are they interacting on your site? How do they look different? Because the thing with bots is they try to emulate and be as human as possible.
Of course.
Right. And so it might sound oxymoronic, but it's also looking for that pattern of randomness where you're able to find around like the random generation. So like for us, it's about understanding the telemetry information, where it's also saying like, hey, why is the browser with browser height 0? That's strange. How are you on the site if your browser with browser height 0, right? Like even taking the notion of like gyroscopic, like is this person that says on a mobile, is the phone actually moving every time you type it, right? From an accelerometer perspective. So looking really detailed into these, what we call like behavioral biometrics.
Right. That would basically, if it was real user behavior, it would be there, yeah. But okay, it brings us on to, I think, the last topic, which is really interesting, is kind of like that there are, you talk about good and bad actors, but just because they are programmatic, a bot doesn't necessarily make them a bad actor. There are definitely use cases, maybe now, certainly in the near future, where you as a good actor, a genuine customer, wants to send off a bot to go and purchase your, hey Siri, repurchase that pair of sneakers that I got last month.
Yeah. That's where things get really tricky, and that's where we're most excited about. And what we say is work.
Siri's now kicking off because it's actually.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, it's like the Super Bowl commercial that was like, "Hey Alexa," and then Alexa turned on in like millions of households.
Yeah.
But that's where we very much focus, and we say like, what's the intentionality of this individual, right? Because I think the way the world's moving is, I think we're all going to have AI agents to go purchase or cancel or just basically handle stuff digitally for us, right? And that's where we have to start getting a little bit more deep into saying, what's the intentionality of this individual? Not just how they're interacting of saying, okay, well, this is a bot, but what are they looking to accomplish? What are they
Yeah.
looking to achieve? And that's where we very much use the word intentionality, because it's extremely important compared to just looking at like device metrics of saying, okay, browser width, browser height is none, right? Okay, fine. Like that doesn't tell me if it's good or bad. So very much looking at how are they interacting? Who are they interacting? What are they trying to achieve? And going into a little bit of a deeper level compared to just who is this individual, right?
Yeah.
So
No, it's great, and as you know, it's not as simple as just filtering out bots. It's about saying, is this a known pattern of fraud or something we've seen before, or does this actually look more like genuinely a customer journey? Because presumably
what
at the point at which that sort of good bot actually wanted to purchase it, put in some real customer details because they want to get that product actually shipped to a real address and so on.
Well, I have a question for you. Like, I mean, just like just the industry, right? Like, obviously, it's possible to get around captchas even using bots, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
captcha solvers, but like, where does the world of captcha go, right? Like, is that going to be disappeared because of the amount of good consumers, right? Or the amount of good bots and like AI agents, or are captcha solvers just going to be, that's just something I was just thinking about. I'm curious your take of like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think I won't answer the question directly, but the analogous problem which I've been thinking about is kind of like on LinkedIn, there's increasing number of bots kind of spamming, and like
Yeah.
how do you train AI to spot the AI spam? Because both it becomes an arms race, doesn't it? Where even if the AI can cleverly detect, then the AI that's trying to get through will just come up with a cleverer way of looking more like users or solving that capture in your example.
Yeah.
So I kind of think, and it's true of other sort of, the other debate I was going to last week was about, again, it's like fake images, like, yeah, there's some clever AI techniques where you can detect whether the image has been modeled with, but also then you can build even better AI that basically fakes the watermarks or whatever you're putting in there. So I think it's an unending battle and probably something that can't be solved. There's always going to be ways of getting around these things. I think from our chat, though, what's made it clear to me is that the important thing is to look at not just one sort of signal, but a whole variety of different signals, as you say, from the kind of physical, like network address perspective, like where are these people coming from, to the kind of how they behave on the site, through to kind of what are the products they're looking to buy. I mean, I guess one of the things we haven't covered here is that, most brands, I mean, obviously certain brands are high risk anyway, just because of the nature of the products they sell, they're going to get more of the stuff.
Mhm.
Definitely anyone in luxury or high value goods knows that this is a bigger problem. Anything that can be resold for basically cash, people like Apple products, etc. This is just always going to be a bigger problem.
Yeah.
If I'm selling like food or something, I'm hardly getting
Yeah.
any of it forward, right? Because it's perishable and low value. But I think, yeah, people who are selling. I mean, I know. I heard a story actually of a wine merchant in the UK that was selling very high end wine, and they had this sort of transaction go through for like $50,000, and it was only caught right at the end by the delivery driver who noticed that they were delivering to this house that was basically empty, and it was all the fraud was just basically there wasn't that address at all. There was like a van waiting around the corner that was just going to
Mhm.
pick it up from this empty doorstep. Um, so I think that I think you've got to be on the lookout. It's not as simple as just looking for one thing. It's about being savvy about in the round. Is this a high risk thing? So I kind of buy your approach that it's not as simple as saying this is a bad actor or this is a good actor. What's the risk this is a bad actor, and how far do we want to go in interviewing them? One of the other points we didn't cover, which she said earlier, was that there are cases where you have people who might be bad actors in the sense that they're known sort of resellers or part of these sort of reseller communities, but you might want to offload your discounted stock or your end of line items, and there are good buyers for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you have to think about the duality of businesses, right? Like, let's take sneakers, right, as an example. Where like 2 years ago, the average price of sneakers, it didn't matter what time I brought it, I would make a profit. Now the resale market of sneakers has like dramatically cooled, and so the nice thing is like, hey, you know what? Like, if I need to sell at a coupon or a discount, but I'm going to send it final sale, I'm going to send it to resellers first that are bulk buying. Right. And so that's like one of the things we also take into our risk score is also what products are people buying? What's the profitability of this customer? Right. Because I think that's really important of saying like, what's the opportunity cost of selling it to Jordan compared to selling it to Steve? Right. And that's something we very much take into is like, because like we work with some department stores, and when it comes to dresses, like dresses are returned much higher than certain items. Like, how do those different items think about, how do they impact the risk score across the board of like, will this be returned or is it fraudulent?
Yeah, I mean, again, we all know that it's kind of one wear items like dresses obviously have a much higher returns rate for the obvious reason.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, that was super interesting. It's all we've got time for today. But yep, sounds like there's some great use cases for using Klaviyo plus Littledata plus Yofi to make sure that you're kind of getting both audiences, performant audiences you can target, but also audiences that are full of genuine profiles that you want to target. So please do ask any other questions in the chat, and look forward to doing more with you, Jordan.
Likewise. Thank you.